I started finally to divorce myself from him. But in the early days of the series, when I was trying to find this character and I was really working at it, then of course I got wrapped up in him. My 20-year marriage was a prison, and he was the only one I ever loved. A few weeks before his passing, Dan Blocker, the legendary star from Bonanza, who was admired worldwide as an ideal family figure, left behind a shocking diary. The words he wrote stunned everyone. Dan admitted that his life was never as it appeared, a play where everything was staged for the media. My marriage to Dolphia was merely a facade. They stayed together because of duty, not love. Both of them had affairs and secretly separated. But what was most shocking was that Dan had loved a famous man, a relationship no one had ever known about. Before starting the video, if Dan Blocker was once a role model for you, please leave a heart in the comments to honor him. Now, let's dive into the shocking secrets behind this marriage. 1. The moment I walked into the chapel, I kept wondering if this was really happening. It was a scorching afternoon in July 1950 at the sports field of Sul Ross State University in Texas. A big man, broad-shouldered like a Marine, walked into the drama class with his hair still dusty from the long road. Dan Blocker, 22 years old at the time, had just been discharged after serving in the Korean War. He returned with eyes darkened from sleeplessness, weighed down with things that no one but his fellow soldiers could truly understand. Dolphia Lee Parker sat in the third row. A small girl with sharp eyes, she was practicing lines for the fall play in the theater department. Dan first saw her not through laughter or a gaze, but through a criticism she made to the class director. "This script is for adults. Why are you giving it to inexperienced students?" He laughed. She glanced at him, and strangely, it was a look no one in the class would dare give the large man who had been trained to take down opponents in an instant. From those brief rehearsals, they started meeting outside class. No roses, no black and white romantic movies like those of the time. Just black coffee, cheap apple pie, and late-night stories about nightmares that Dan never dared share with anyone but her. Dolphia, at 20 years old, orphaned since childhood, understood loss and absence. They didn't love each other because they were compatible, but because they both lacked something. But neither of them ever spoke of it. Their romance moved fast. Only 4 months after meeting, Dolphia was pregnant. The news was like a bombshell in the cheap apartment in Alpine, Texas, where they were secretly living together on weekends. At the time, Dan didn't have a stable job and was still receiving veterans benefits. Dolphia had lost her scholarship after dropping out mid-semester. With no way out, Dan proposed one evening in February 1952. No ring, no flowers, just a soft-spoken line while she was sitting washing clothes. "I think we should get married, not because of society, but for the child." Dolphia was silent for a long time. Then she nodded. The wedding took place hastily at a small church in Carlsbad, New Mexico, with only one close friend, Jack Lewis, who had studied with Dan at Sul Ross, standing witness. In his memoir published in 1985, Lewis wrote, "They didn't look happy, but neither were they miserable. It was like two people performing in a play where no one had read the script beforehand." On their wedding night, Dan went outside to sit alone in front of the motel. A housekeeping staff later recounted in an NBC Archives documentary 1979 that, "I saw him sitting for hours, not smoking, not drinking, just staring at the street, as if he was thinking, 'I just made a mistake I can't undo.'" Although no one officially spoke of it, rumors circulated among old classmates at Sul Ross about a letter Dan had sent to a fellow platoon member, a letter that an ex-girlfriend had found and secretly read. In it, Dan confessed, "I don't know if I love her, but I'm afraid I'll lose something again. I'm afraid I don't deserve real love." The letter later disappeared, and no one knew whether it still existed. But the story was enough to shake the dormitory of the university at the time. What few people knew, just 3 weeks after the wedding, Dan had to take a job as a laborer in Odessa to make money for diapers for their baby. Dolphia had even kneeled in front of the admissions office, begging to be allowed back into school, but was turned away for violating student ethics. In later years, she never spoke about this period, except for one sentence during a private conversation with journalist Anita Moreno in 1978. "I once thought I was the first wife to get married without ever being asked, 'Are you happy?'" From an awkward love story, they entered marriage like people walking into a maze with no map. No rituals, no happiness, no shared dreams. Only a child and a commitment bound by responsibility, not love. But what doesn't come from the heart will eventually come with a price. That was the beginning of all the breakdowns that followed, and no one had the strength to stop it. Next, things got even more complicated when Hollywood began paying attention to Dan. But it wasn't for his acting talent. It was for the image of the perfect family man that the studios were determined to sell him as. 2. The media destroyed our family. In 1959, when the first episode of Bonanza aired on NBC, few in Hollywood paid attention to the name Dan Blocker. He was just a supporting actor with an oversized body, a kind face, few words from Texas, who had only played minor roles no one remembered. However, it was his appearance that caught the eye of Fred Silverman, the new content supervisor for NBC at the time. In an emergency meeting at the MGM Studios headquarters in Culver City, he pointed at Dan's photo and said, "This will be the symbol of the American family man. Honest, strong, scandal-free. We'll sell him like we sell a can of milk." And just as Silverman predicted, by the end of 1959, a media campaign was launched. Dozens of reporters from TV Guide, Life magazine, Look, and Photoplay were invited to the Bonanza set to interview the ideal American man, a title Dan had never heard before. Before the cameras, Dan appeared with his wife, Dolphia Blocker, and their 4 young children. The family was staged standing by a white fence, dressed in pastel clothes, holding ice cream, smiling. But what few knew was that just hours before the 1960 photo shoot for the New Year's issue of TV Guide, Dolphia had been crying in the car because Dan had forgotten their daughter Deborah's birthday. She said through her tears, "You can't even remember our child's birthday, but you remember your lines." Dan was silent, took the car keys, and left for the studio. In the January 2, 1961 issue, People magazine dedicated 6 pages to the photo spread "A Weekend at Dan Blocker's House," featuring images of Dan mowing the lawn, Dolphia baking, and the children playing in the backyard. In reality, the house in the photos was a rented villa in Pasadena, completely staged by NBC's PR department. Only Dan was real. The children were the children of the film crew. Dolphia was not there that day because she was exhausted from a mild nervous breakdown and had to be hospitalized in Alpine. This information was never publicly disclosed. Even during the Ed Sullivan Show broadcast in May 1961, Dan was invited to appear with his wife and children. But at the last minute, Dolphia refused to appear. NBC had to hire a part-time model named Helen Winters, who was made up to look like Dolphia and sat next to Dan throughout the show. This detail was only revealed in the 1992 memoir The PR Lies We Sold by former PR employee Margaret Leeds. During this period, rumors began to leak behind the scenes. Several former crew members from the Bonanza set shared that Dan often slept in the makeup room. One night, a security guard found him crying in front of the mirror at 2 a.m., holding a photo of his wife and children. A lighting technician named Ricky Howard once said in a short interview with Hollywood Weekly in 1980, he was the only one on set who always apologized, even when no one blamed him. One time I asked why he didn't go home, and he just said, "There's no one waiting for me there anymore." While Dan struggled with his role even in real life, Dolphia began to withdraw. She refused to attend parent-teacher meetings,